Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by survivingbreastcancer.org. I am Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of survivingbreastcancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. You have heard us talk about Citizen for some time now if you've been listening to the podcast for the last couple of weeks. Citizen is amazing. The more that I have been interacting with them, the more and more I am kind of obsessed with their technology. They are there to go out and, on behalf of us, the patient, for free, go out and get our medical records. So it's consolidated all in one place, making it super easy for us to then be able to send our medical history or medical files to other doctors if we need second opinions, if we end up moving, or if we want to participate in clinical trials. But what Citizen is actually able to do is, based on our medical data, they're able to provide us with a matching system to find the clinical trials that we qualify for. You can find out more by visiting citizen.com/SBC clinical trials, and I'll link to it below in the show notes. In today's conversation, I am joined with Abigail, who's going to be moderating a very heartfelt and moving conversation with three husbands, Christian, Jimmy, and Andrew, who have all lost their wives to metastatic breast cancer. In today's conversation, we are going to get a snapshot of who these men are, and then also a deep dive into the lives of their wives, as well as understanding that MBC takes more than just our lives. There are so many other losses that come with the breast cancer metastatic diagnosis. Welcome to the conversation.
Those of us living with metastatic breast cancer, it's easy to forget that our experience, our disease, what is happening to us, what is eventually going to kill us, is affecting everybody in our lives. And I think one of the primary relationships that are affected are those partnerships, those romantic relationships, those relationships with people where we have promised to do life until our death with this particular person. And while we have husbands speaking today about losing their wives to MBC, I think that this is not a gender type situation. It's not incumbent on having a legal relationship. It could just be whoever you're going through life with, who is your partner, who is the first person that you turn to when you are making decisions or living together, having children, et cetera, building a life together. So I don't want anybody to think that if you're not a husband, that this doesn't apply to you, because from my perspective, it does. So just from a format perspective today, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, then introduce their wonderful wives who have passed. And then I'm going to guide the conversation to, kind of as a walking through the process. So diagnosis, living with, and then as they transitioned not to be no longer living. And then at the end, we'll talk about legacies, and we'll talk about how each of these husbands are continuing the legacy that their wives left behind. And I think you guys will be really, really excited to hear about some of the wonderful things that these guys are doing.
Thank you, Abigail. Honored to be here. My name is Christian Garnett. I'm 35 years old, proud father of Felix, who turned 5 back in November. My wife, Emily, died from metastatic breast cancer back in end of March 2020. I'm a design engineer for a decorative lighting company, so I make very fancy lamps and used to go to China about 6 times a year, but the last year have been homebound, trying to review samples and stuff via Zoom, which has been a challenge, as everyone's life has been a challenge, but hopeful to get back to normal soon.
Great. I think I've realized that people who come from different perspectives, I've got a couple of engineers in my family, will talk about things in a different way. So I think it's good to get an idea of where each of you are coming from for our viewers. So Andrew, can we come to you next?
Sure. Andrew Silver. I am the father of Noah Silver and the husband of Anya Silver, and I teach down here at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And Anya and I taught down here for 20 years before she died in 2015.
And what subjects again do you teach?
I teach literature. So right now I'm teaching modern drama, I do American literature, and then I do a course called Building Community, where we go out and interview a lot of folks, and that I'll talk a little bit about maybe later on.
Wonderful. And he plays a mean guitar too. So don't forget that. Jimmy, can we come over to you?
Yeah, of course. My name is Jimmy Borton. I am best known for being the husband of Melissa Beck Borton. I am a film producer and I live in Chicago, Illinois.
What kind of films would we have seen that you've produced?
The most recent one was Ginger. It was a feature-length dark comedy about a 23-year-old who is diagnosed with breast cancer, which is loosely based on me and Melissa's initial experience with breast cancer.
Great. And I had the great experience of getting to see that. I think it was 2019. It's been a little while. So it's a wonderful film.
Thank you.
Turning to you, Christian, can you tell us a little bit about your wife, Emily, and what made her so magnetic and incredible?
My wife, Emily, was an attorney who, it's funny, when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she told me that she felt like her entire life had been leading up to that moment, because she was always bizarrely interested in diseases and specifically cancer, like from a very young age. And in her law career, she was an elder law attorney, so she did wills and trusts and estate law, and was a guardian and very involved in guardianships. So when she was diagnosed, she kind of treated her own cancer journey as like her own personal little research case study, because that was kind of what she did for other people. She helped them get their affairs in order before they died. She helped, before she got her law degree, she worked as a case manager at a nonprofit who worked with patients with HIV. And before that, she worked as a surgical coordinator and medical biller for an orthopedic surgeon. So, like, navigating the world of insurance, navigating end-of-life directives and hospital appointments and all of the various players that come into play when you have a chronic illness. She was like a pig in shit. Like, as bizarre as it is to say, like, she was kind of living her best life, in a really weird way. Not that she was happy about it, but she definitely found some purpose in it, as well as in the tremendous amount of advocacy that she did in the breast cancer community, her podcast, her blog, the play that I'll let Andrew talk about. She really crammed a lot of life into those 2.5 years. Really, I would, for many people, would probably consider almost a career's worth of work that she managed to get done. So it was, I think, she made a really big impact in a very relatively short amount of time, which I think is something you hear about again and again in the MBC community, because everyone's on the clock. And it was she was definitely a force to be reckoned with.
She was a competitive swimmer too, wasn't she?
Yeah, competitive in a lot of things. Just a competitive person. Didn't like someone telling her she couldn't do something or shouldn't do something. That was a surefire way to get her to do it. But yeah, she was a swimmer. She ran the New York City Marathon. She was an amazing mother, an amazing daughter, incredible wife, just an overall amazing human.
I think one of my favorite stories about Emily was when she was taking the bar exam, that she made friends with the person sitting next to her, such that that person was Facebook friends with her years and years after they took the bar exam together. That was Emily.
Yeah, that's peak Emily right there. Yes, the person she sat next to at the bar exam sent me an email when she died and was like, I know this sounds weird, but I met her at the bar exam and have followed her ever since. Like, no, that doesn't sound weird. If you know Emily, it does not sound weird at all.
No, not at all.
Andrew, can you introduce us to your wife, Anya?
Yeah, listening to Christian talk, I'm struck by the impossibility of summing up our wives in this kind of fashion. Emily was she defied words. You just have to be there to feel that kind of energy. But then the other thing that really strikes me about it is that cancer, and this is probably true for Melissa too, that cancer was absolutely transformational in her life. And this has to come with a quick caveat that Christian said, which is that they knew, I know that Anya knew that cancer was a gift to her poetry, but she would have turned down that gift and burned all of her poems if she could have spent another day here. And so it's a strange thing. So Anya was a poet. She had written since she was like in 7th grade. She had written a book or something and moved into poetry and started publishing when she was in college. And when I met her, she was this kind of unflappable force of nature. She, like Emily, but she had a kind of quiet power to her. She would go up. I used to act, and I would get very jittery before I'd get on stage. And Anya was just cool as a cucumber. She'd get up there on stage and start reading with just this enormous confidence in her work. And she just had this gift with the sensuality of language in her poems, with turns of phrase and images and metaphors that were just absolutely striking. I don't know where she came up with them. And when she was diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer when she was pregnant with my son Noah, with our son, I want to say that there were times when she wanted to give up poetry, that, she was getting rejection letters. She was getting a series of second place finishes in a bunch of different poetry contests. And then I think cancer gave her what she called, well, she's quoting Emily Dickinson, the flood subject. For Dickinson, that's mortality. And it just put her poetry into another world. I want to keep, I'm mindful of brevity. I'm just going to say, I could talk for a long, long time. She is also incredibly kind, incredibly tender, a deeply spiritual person who didn't shy away from very difficult questions, and also the funniest person that I'd ever known, though I think that there's a tie with Emily Garnett there. but both such funny people, and I loved her dearly. We were married for 20, just about 20 years. Yeah.
I have to say that Anya's poetry puts the experience of metastatic breast cancer into language that is it's a heart language from my perspective, reading her poetry. And for any of you who are listening and want to learn more about the experiences of somebody living with this disease, I have bought and given at least a dozen of each of her books to people, because it just captures so much of the nuance of what it's like to be alive while your body is literally crumbling. So her poetry has been something that has really resonated with me. So her books are on Amazon, and I would definitely encourage everybody who's listening to consider purchasing her poetry. And of course, we'll get to the play, which features some of her poetry as well. And she's really had a gift.
Going through Emily's books after she died, looking at notes that she'd written, and found a book of Anya's poetry that Emily had that was very heavily dog-eared. And I believe we have not yet had a memorial service for her because she died literally as COVID blew up, and we waited so long that I was like, there's no point in rushing it until I can get all of the hugs that I missed out on the first time around.
Yeah.
So we're waiting until everyone's vaccinated and we don't have to worry about it. But she has a bunch of directives, as we'll get to when we get to that part. But I think there's at least one poem of Anya's that she mentioned as being a possibility for being read at her memorial.
Yeah, so somebody asked what books where to start, and probably her most optimistic book is 93rd Name of God, which is the first book she wrote, and she was still, I think she was in remission for part of that book. But if you can cope with the darker material, I think I Watched You Disappear would be, if I had to pick one volume of those 4 volumes, which one I would pick, which was written from the metastatic experience specifically.
I believe that's the one that I found.
Yeah, Emily liked that one.
Emily did not shy away from dark.
Jimmy, can we come to you next? And can you tell us about Melissa's life story?
Yeah. So Melissa was, at the end of the day, she was an artist. I actually met her in film school. We were at Loyola in college together studying film, and she was the one person, we got partnered up, and she'd always kind of challenge any idea I had of what makes great cinema and how to tell a great story. She always had her own thought, and she wouldn't budge from that. And we ended up really working together and having kind of a synergy to our work together. But, I think she had multiple diagnoses. So when we wrote Ginger, that was shortly after she was diagnosed when she was 23. And that was very early stage breast cancer. So most of the time we were told, she's going to be okay. There's nothing really to worry about. And then later when she was 28, she was diagnosed metastatic. But throughout that time, she was always trying to help other people in her situation. She wanted her story to resonate with someone else, especially because when she was 23, when we were both 23, when we were dating, she, it was one of those things where we didn't see a lot of people in our situation who were 23 years old, just got out of college, trying to find our first jobs and, get hit with a cancer diagnosis. And so, I think for her, it was about using her art to help somebody.
It sounds like a consistent theme throughout all of your wives, that they used what they had and they used their strengths in very different ways to be able to pass on something of themselves. And I think each of them really has done that. So what I want to go to next is the diagnosis.
Emily was initially diagnosed as stage 2. Her primary care doctor, during a routine physical, found a lump, said you should get an ultrasound. It's probably nothing. It's probably a cyst from breastfeeding. Had the ultrasound. They said, let's do a mammogram. Did the mammogram. Let's do a biopsy. Come back this afternoon. At that point, when they said come back this afternoon, we immediately, Felix was still with us. He was on my lap in the waiting room that whole time. And we said, okay, we got to drop the kid off somewhere. And as soon as we figured out where to drop Felix off, she looked at me and goes, okay, take me to CVS. I need pens and a legal pad. They did an MRI and they looked at the right breast, and then they wanted to look at the left breast, and they completely jumped over the breastbone in between, which was riddled with metastatic lesions. Just because they weren't looking for him. So fortunately, we got a second opinion at Sloan Kettering, and the question in our mind going in was, okay, we're going to meet with the surgeon. It's going to be, okay, 1 boob or 2. That was, what are we going to take off? So the surgeon walks in and goes, hi, I'm Dr. Mora. It's so nice to meet you. You don't really need to see me yet. You're going to be talking to my medical oncologist counterpart, but I just wanted to say hi, and leaves. And we're like, wait, what? And then we get pulled into the office of her oncologist, who goes, okay, we're sure, yeah, we'll talk about surgery possibly, but what we're really more worried about is the lesion on the breastbone. And we go, the what on the where now? And she goes, the lesion on your breastbone. And that was when her face kind of went, shit. And that was when she realized that, of course, it's a second opinion, so they don't look at the case file from before, so she had no idea that we had no idea. So she kind of did okay, let's back up. You're stage 4, not stage 2. And that's when, the ringing in the ears starts and everything kind of spins for a few minutes. I think we gave ourselves about a day to kind of wallow. And then it was, let's start researching. The hardest part was when we got the initial diagnosis and they said, okay, they didn't even think we needed surgery. They were like, yeah, we'll do a round of chemo, probably no radiation, and wait 5 years and you'll be able to have another baby. Because we were at that point trying for a second kid. Emily's first question when they said stage 4 was, am I going to be able to have another baby? And the doctor was like, no, never. And that was when Emily lost it. Because that was, I think, the first kind of real grief that we experienced due to the diagnosis. Like that was the first loss. More so than the prospect of losing her breasts, which she was like, I've never really loved them anyway. Losing her fertility was the big blow. The loss of giving Felix a sibling, which we really wanted to do, the loss of giving ourselves another child, just the loss of that future really was, I think, the big thing that hit us so hard with the initial metastatic diagnosis.
After that first appointment, you talked about the wallowing for a day and then getting to work, and that just is quintessential Emily. But is that your way of coping as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that was aligned.
Yeah, very much so. I'm a man of action. I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do about it? It is what it is. We don't have a time machine. It is what it is. What are we going to do about it? Which I think, as much as Emily was like that, I think I'm probably more like that. So I think I sometimes dragged her along in that a little bit, but I think she appreciated it. We took our turns with, okay, I'm gonna have my sad day today, and the other one is gonna be sitting here going, yeah, get up off the mat. But in general, I think we were both pretty much like, what's next,
And that served you both well in terms of getting to the next medication and getting to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, can you share a little bit more about Anya? I understand that she was diagnosed originally with early stage, and perhaps give us a timeline before it became metastatic.
So Anya was diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer. It was supposed to kill her within, I think the average life expectancy was about 2 years or so at the time she was diagnosed. But this was previous to the development of all sorts of things like Herceptin that could extend life for people with inflammatory breast cancer. And so the sort of reality back then was that if you can live for 5 years with inflammatory breast cancer, you're in the clear. And she had lived for 5 years with inflammatory breast cancer on Herceptin. And so, we always felt like we were kind of walking on the thinnest veneer of ice, and that any day we could sort of be swallowed up. But there was some sense that maybe she had managed to slip away from inflammatory breast cancer. she started working out at the gym and started feeling something in her sternum, and she thought maybe, she was doing a lot of sit-ups, and she thought maybe, she had strained something. And I guess I'll just say this much for spouses watching together. It's a really difficult thing as a spouse to both try to calm your loved one, and then not to live in denial. There were 2 times where I tried to calm Anya, tried to reassure Anya, and I was wrong. And the sternum was one, and the day before she died was another. Mm. I always had the sense that I didn't live in denial, but I couldn't live with full recognition. And so I had to live in this contingent world of maybe what if, maybe what if Herceptin works? Maybe what if she found a way to slow this down? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we were in a practice here in Macon, Georgia, which was notorious for its wait. And so we were stuck in a waiting room for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, to find out whether she had a recurrence. I remember I was so nervous. I get kind of OCD or something sometimes. Before I acted is when I used to do this, and then before these huge moments. And I remember trying to line up my shoes. There's a board kind of pattern in the way. I was lining up my shoes. I was just absolutely freaking out. Nervous beyond belief. But waiting and waiting and waiting. You'd go from the waiting room to another sub-waiting room to the final, sort of antiseptic room where they hold you. Everything is cold. Your nerves are shot. And finally, we begged the physician's assistant, just tell us what the deal is. And he said, there's a spot on your sternum. And it's hard to describe how to feel, because Anya was also trying to reassure me that, when it's in the bones, it moves slowest. That's not a bad place for it to go. So I don't think I had a sense of what stage 4 was. And I just kept thinking, okay, it's in the bones. We'll just try to contain it there. It's in the sternum. And then the doctor came in and said, maybe this is necrosis from radiation to, I think that was right. She thought it was necrosis from radiation to the breast area. And so we had this little glimmer of hope there too. I clung to that for a few more days. It feels like you climb to the very top of a tree, and then the branch gives, the next branch gives, and then, by the time you hit the bottom, you've just been dazed and just shaken of your ability to think at some level. So I was sort of stunned and in shock, I think. And I think looking for ways to reassure myself that this didn't mean the end of the line for Anya, that it was just another phase. And, I've always thought, since the first time she was diagnosed, when you're given this horrible news, it feels as though you're like a cat or a wild animal that's been stuck down into this dark sack, and you begin to struggle and you try to claw your way out. And then this weird thing happens where, all of a sudden, you're that same cat and you've normalized the bag, and you're setting up tea in the bag and doing these weird, you're carrying on normal, And so I think something sort of similar happened there too. But I don't think I fully understood. I don't think I fully understood what stage 4 meant to Anya, and I think that Anya was still looking to the metastatic community for reassurance that bone mets were controllable, and indeed they were for a long time.
There is such a fine line between denial and optimism, especially in the role of the caregiver.
There's a reason why I calmed all the time. It's because, as anybody knows in the metastatic community, for every one time that you have a progression, there are hundreds of times, like literally sometimes hundreds of times, when you think something is wrong, you feel some twinge in your brain and you think I've got brain cancer, or you feel an ache in your hip and you think it's gone to your hip. And so, after scan, you begin to say, well, chances are this is maybe something that is real, that might come from a side effect from your medications that are likely ruining the body as well. So yeah, it's hard. It's an impossible thing both to calm and to be realistic.
I also love the metaphors of the hitting all the branches on the way down, and the cat in the bag normalizing, because we all normalize this.
We're bag people now.
Yeah, it's
funny, with a dark sense of humor as well.
That's right.
Jimmy, can we come over to you, talk about that experience of Melissa learning that she was metastatic?
Yeah, well, mine is very unique because, so focusing on the metastatic diagnosis, she was already sort of out of treatment. And because she was so young, the hospital that she was getting treatment at was very adamant that she was too young for cancer. And if you've seen the movie, that's kind of how it played out. Was, somebody told her, oh no, you're too young, she had to wait for scans. One doctor actually said, you're fine, don't worry about it, we're not going to do scans because it's not hospital policy, which annoyed me, but it also, I believed it. So we were in the middle of making a movie, and Melissa had some stomach pains and went in to get a second opinion at Northwestern. And I was actually scouting a location for some scenes we were doing, so I wasn't even there. And she called me crying as I'm walking out the door saying, it's back. And, I personally was furious with the doctors who kept saying, oh, you're fine. And that became kind of our mantra to anybody else going through this, that, you got to be your own self-advocate. Doctors are great. They don't know everything. From that point on, though, it became, what are we going to do next? What's the next treatment? What's the next option? What's the next place to go to make her feel better? But I don't think either of us really were willing to accept that it was terminal, that it was, metastatic, and that there was no real coming back from it. We both had a lot of hope that something would work. Because like you said, you have one scan where things get much worse, and then you have a scan that things get much better. And then you think, who knows, maybe this is the one. This is the treatment that's going to beat the odds. And that really builds up a lot of, at least in my experience, was a lot of anticipatory grief. A lot of feelings of, hopelessness and just lack of control. You lose control in these situations, and you just have to kind of, you can be as proactive as you want, but cancer doesn't really care how hard you work. It's non-discriminating in the sense that it's just going to keep doing its thing. So for us, it became, let's make lemons out of lemonade, or lemonade out of lemons, and try to make the best of it and just never give up. So I think for us, it's kind of the starting point for figuring out what to do next.
Was fertility a significant issue for Melissa as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, neither of us were really sure we wanted to have kids, so it really wasn't a big factor in our relationship. But she had actually had an oophorectomy at one point, so yeah, kids were out of the question pretty early. I mean, when she was diagnosed early stage at 23, even then they were like, you're gonna have to wait 5 years, and by the time 5 years passed, she was metastatic. So it was it just kind of was off the table from day one.
Now, Anya had a really late miscarriage. There were maybe 2 ended pregnancies, one of which was really late. And she frankly felt more trauma at the loss of that late pregnancy. I want to say it like 16 weeks, maybe. It was a very difficult thing. she felt more trauma there than she did at her cancer diagnosis. And the reason was because she was pregnant when she had the cancer diagnosis. But we, I think, absolutely would have wanted another child. We thought for a little while we were in that little window of remission that maybe we would adopt. And so we tried and eventually came to, the realization and acceptance that we couldn't have another child. But absolutely, that was a loss, a huge loss for her.
So many losses with MBC.
So many losses that are not obvious, right? Like, unless you're going through it. I think when you hear the term breast cancer or metastatic or stage 4, you think about surgery, loss of body parts, loss of hair because of chemo. But there's all of these other losses we experience: loss of fertility, loss of control, loss of all of the other symptoms that come with all the treatments that we're on. So I'm really glad that we are having these tough conversations, bringing them to light, and also being able to remember Emily, Anya, and Melissa. We are going to be continuing these conversations with Jimmy, Andrew, and Christian over the next couple of days and weeks. So be sure to tune into our podcast to hear updates. And they're going to share some excellent resources and information about how they managed self-care and coping while their wives were going through a metastatic breast cancer diagnosis. And then, as Abigail referenced earlier, our last series will be on the legacies that they are leaving. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our podcast. If you would like to find out more about our organization and upcoming events and ways to connect, you can find out more by visiting our website at survivingbreastcancer.org. I would like to acknowledge that all of the information on our podcast is from personal experiences, and it is not a substitute for professional medical advice. You should always consult your medical care team. If you're looking for specific topics or would like to be a guest on our show, feel free to contact me directly at laura@survivingbreastcancer.org. And of course, we have a couple social media handles you can follow us at as well. For example, survivingbreastcancer.org, all one word, as well as our podcast specifically, Breast Cancer Conversations. Until next time, keep on thriving.